Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break on this magnificent first day of summer in Cleveland. We are thrilled to welcome today Michael Weidokal, an internationally recognized economist. After a career that took him to over 60 countries, Michael stepped back and founded and now serves as Executive Director of International Strategic Analysis. He's a sought-after keynote speaker on the economy, trade, politics, security, and demographics. He is driven to understand how the world will change in the years ahead and to share his research-informed insights. Today, we're going to tap into that research and that talent and that vision to guide us to understand the future for our Northeast Ohio economy. Michael serves as an executive in residence and visiting professor at Baldwin Wallace University, and he's also a prolific writer, yes, to ISA's monthly country reports and risk forecasts, but more importantly, we look forward to the release of his new book. I don't think it's been released yet, Michael, am I correct?
That's correct.
We'll keep our eyes out for that, The Coming Decline. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy first day of summer. I grew up in this part of the world and then moved away at a young age. And every time I would come back in the summertime, I was always excited to come back. It's really a great place to be in the summer months. Maybe not as much in the winter, but certainly in the summer. So before I share my screen here, I do have a short presentation that I'd like to share with you. And by the way, everyone will be able to have a copy of the presentation. So don't worry if you miss something in it. What I want to talk about today is economic competitiveness and its role in shaping the future of Northeast Ohio. It is an absolutely vital component of our future and will determine a lot of our future. So I want to get into this presentation as quickly as possible. I know I don't have too much time. I do look forward to your questions that'll be coming up, but let me just share my screen here. Let's make sure this works. I believe you can see my screen. So here we go. Now we've had a nice introduction to me already, so I don't need to talk too much about me. Again, I grew up here in Cleveland. A West Sider, spent my formative years here and then moved away and have been back now for 2.5 years. And it's been a really exciting place to come back to. And I'm really happy to contribute what I can to our community. What do I want to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about briefly the economy of Northeast Ohio, where we are, how we're performing. What is economic competitiveness? Why is that important to our economy? What are our region's advantages in terms of economic advantages, and what are the challenges facing the region? And then hopefully we'll talk a little bit about the region's economic future. And like I said, we'll have certainly 10 or 15 minutes where I can answer any questions that you might have. So let's get into this. It's not a long presentation, but I've got a few interesting things that I'd like to bring up. First of all, what about our economy? And if you look at that chart on the left, that shows the rate of economic growth for the state of Ohio. And as you can see, we've had not the best run of economic growth. Certainly the pandemic hit us hard. We bounced back in 2021 and then slowed again in 2022. If we look at it from a state's perspective, Northeast Ohio's probably grown a little bit slower than the state average. That's due to a number of factors, particularly demographics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And what's important to note is that this is a lower rate of growth than we see on the national average. For example, over the past decade, Ohio's economy has grown 1.6% per year. The U.S. economy at the same time has grown 2.1% per year. The global economy has grown by about 3% per year during that period. So certainly we've been lagging in Ohio when it comes to economic growth. There are a number of reasons for that. If we look at what are the key drivers of economic growth, there's demographics, and certainly that's an area where we have a big challenge. We'll talk about it in a little bit. There's trade and investment, where Ohio's been making some progress in terms of attracting investment and boosting our international trade. And there's productivity. And productivity, of course, is the big issue facing the economy right now. Economies like the United States, like Ohio's, have been seeing lower and lower levels of productivity in recent decades, and that's been a very big challenge. I want to talk about this chart a little bit because I think this is very important. The blue bar, I'm colorblind, but I'm assuming those bars are blue, that you see in this chart are the average rate of annual economic growth for the world's rich countries. So each year, the average rate of growth for the world's rich countries. So North America, West Europe, Japan, et cetera. The gray line are emerging markets. Look what's happened in the world's rich countries. Now imagine it this way. Imagine your grandfather had a business and he ran that business in the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, and he was doing business in the United States, Canada, Germany, Japan, et cetera. Those economies were growing more than 4% per year at that point. It's pretty easy for your business to generate growth when your economy is growing over 4% per year. Now imagine your mother took over the business in the 1980s. And in the 1980s and 1990s, look what happened to those traditional economies. They only grew 3% per year. So we've already seen a significant slowdown. Now imagine you took over the business in 2000. Well, what's happened to those economies in North America, in Europe, in Eastern Asia? They've grown less than 2% per year. So those traditional markets where you generated a lot of your growth just aren't generating that level of growth anymore. And that's been a real challenge for places like Ohio, and not just Ohio, but a lot of places that were longtime traditional manufacturing centers, major centers of major developed economies. Now, some of that on a global scale, some of this slowdown has been offset by emerging markets, especially in Asia. But as you can see there, they're slowing now as well. So we face a real challenge. We face a challenge where we need to generate economic growth in an international climate where economic growth is becoming more difficult. And that's certainly something that we look at. Excuse me, as I went one slide ahead. So this is certainly something that we need to focus on, the ability to generate growth. If we're not generating growth, our region, we're not going to be able to have the living standards that we have the infrastructure and the public services that we want. So these are all things that we need to consider. So what is economic competitiveness? What is the heart of this whole issue? Well, it's the ability to attract and retain business, investment, and talent. That's really what it comes down to. Can our region bring businesses into the region and keep the businesses that are here in the region? Can we attract more investment? And can we attract people to this region? This is going to be extremely important as we go forward. If we're able to generate more growth, then we're able to generate more wealth for our population. We're able to improve our public services. We're able to improve the quality of living for our region's inhabitants. So it's very important that we're able to be competitive in order to generate higher rates of economic growth going forward. Now, when we look at competitiveness, we have some clear advantages and some clear disadvantages in our region. What are some of the advantages that we have vis-a-vis our competitors for business, for investment, for talent? Well, we have a great location. We'll talk about each of these a little bit. We have significant cost advantages, which I think most people are aware of. We have a very favorable environmental situation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And we have a high level and an improving level of local support. Obviously, and this has been one of our slogans for decades now in this region, we have a fantastic location. We are at the heart of the world's largest economy. Our region and North America as a whole is growing faster than most other rich parts of the world. So we have a very unique opportunity here. And if we look at what's happening in the world, there's a lot of foreign investment pouring into the United States right now. And a lot of that foreign investment is coming into the manufacturing sector. Companies outside of the US are very concerned that they're going to be locked out of the US market or face punitive tariffs and other trade barriers. So a lot of companies right now are looking to invest in the United States. So our location is certainly an advantage. When it comes to cost advantages, there's really two ways of looking at it. One, from a cost of living standpoint, we compare very favorably to other cities within the United States and around the world. This is very important today, especially in the era of remote working. Talent is no longer tied to the office. And this gives people an opportunity to work from where they want. And it gives them an opportunity to save more money, perhaps, than they would have in the past by setting down roots in places where the cost of living is significantly lower. This also holds true for businesses. the cost of doing business in Northeast Ohio compares favorably to other parts of the world. So this is a very big advantage that we can take advantage of here in Northeast Ohio. Environmental advantages. Most scientists believe that there are few regions on Earth more resilient to climate change than the Great Lake region. We have abundant land, we have abundant water, we face relatively few natural disasters, we have a very strong agricultural sector. This is a real advantage that we can that we can play off of. And when you look at companies today, when they're talking about making major investments around the world, they're now focusing on the environment and sustainability. They're being forced by their investors to ensure that any investment they make is going to be in a part of the world where it is going to have a minimal impact on the environment. And that's certainly something that we can sell Northeast Ohio on. And then, of course, local support. We have a range of organizations that are helping to boost our region's economic competitiveness, both on a regional standpoint. You think of organizations like Team NEO, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, et cetera, and also at the more local level. A lot of cities and counties in our region have very strong economic development organizations that are helping to boost our region's economic competitiveness. Now, it's not all rosy. We do face some significant challenges in this region. There's really three that I'd like to talk about briefly. One is the previous lack of political focus on economic development, a lack of coordination with our region's higher education, and then the big one that everybody's fully aware of, that's the demographic challenges that we faced here in Northeast Ohio. First, of course, this was a region that clearly suffered from a lack of political direction when it comes to economic development. Now, this is changing. We're hearing a lot of positive things come out in recent months and years, and hopefully we'll see the benefits of that going forward. But historically, for a lot of businesses and a lot of investors, we did lack a clear focus on that. But again, I do think this is changing for the better. So that's certainly something that we can look forward to. A big challenge we face is that we don't have a dominant university. Let me give you an example. I speak at Ohio State every year, and of course, the Columbus region just received that giant Intel investment last year. I asked the people at Ohio State, how involved were you at attracting Intel to the region? They said they were at every single meeting between the Columbus area and Intel. Intel wanted to be sure that if they were going to make this massive investment, that there was going to be a workforce there for them. We obviously here in Northeast Ohio, while we have some excellent institutions of higher learning, we have nothing on the scale of an Ohio State or a University of Michigan. So we need more cooperation and coordination between the economic development people and our region's universities. And that's certainly something that I hope we can see going forward, because that's going to be very key to overcoming the next challenge, which of course is the big challenge in our region, and that is our demographic situation. It's no secret that our working age population is in decline. As you can see from that chart on the left, less than 60% of our region's population is now within the working age population, and that's shrinking. That's been shrinking for decades and will continue to shrink. Of course, this is one big reason for this is that birth rates are falling dramatically, both here in Northeast Ohio and around the world. A lot of people have left the region, as we know, both skilled and unskilled workers. And in fact, without immigration, our demographic situation would be a heck of a lot worse than it is now. But this is our number one challenge to attracting investment, attracting businesses to the region, is convincing them that we have the labor force in place if they want to invest here. So this is something we certainly need to look at. So if we look at the future, economic competitiveness is clearly the key to growing our economy and improving the living standards of the people in our region. If we can have a more focused effort on improving our regional economic competitiveness, we can have success in this domain. Improving our demographic situation is going to be the biggest challenge we face. Changing demographics does not happen overnight. This is something that's going to have to be a long-term focus for our region. But there's a number of unique opportunities for Northeast Ohio. The reshoring movement, bringing manufacturing back to places like the Midwest, is a big opportunity for us. Technological change, like artificial intelligence, presents a unique opportunity for our region. And then, of course, the growing awareness of environmental issues really could play into our hands in terms of economic competitiveness as companies look to invest in places more resilient to climate change and other environmental factors. So that's my very brief summary of the economic competitiveness challenges and opportunities facing Northeast Ohio. If anyone has any questions, I would love to take them. I'll stop sharing my screen and I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Michael. And we have had some questions come in. Let me pick up on one of the last things you said when you talked about economic competitiveness, I could talk today, being key to improving living standards. We're wondering, is that a chicken and egg thing? Because sometimes Cleveland shows up on lists of places not to go work because we have high poverty, high infant mortality, and other social issues. How does that play into the picture of economic competitiveness when you're dealing with some serious social challenges in the city and state?
Well, it certainly plays into it if those social challenges are limiting our workforce. And in some respects, they are. We talk about the mobility of citizens within Northeast Ohio. You talk about opportunities for employment among our region's population. Then it definitely plays a role. If we don't have the type of workers, whether it's a certain skill, whether it's a certain let's say background in terms of education, that also plays a role. So there is some impact there, but I firmly believe that we can use economic growth to lift the living standards of the region's population. We've seen this play out in many parts of the world. If you take extreme examples like China, for example, which obviously we're not going to grow at the speed China grew at, but when you talk about hundreds of millions of people being lifted out of poverty in the span of 30 to 40 years, that's a very good selling point for why economic growth really can improve the living standards of a region's population.
So speaking of that workforce, especially you mentioned, talk about talent that's not tied to an office. Does Cleveland really offer enough incentives to attract and retain businesses and those workers? And how can we do a better job of ensuring we have that talent pipeline?
Yeah, that was one of in one of my recent Plain Dealer articles was one of the points I brought up, is that we need to do more, especially when it comes to young talent, people who are at the early stages of their career, looking for a place to live, to set up a family, to set up their future lives, to make it attractive for them, because that's the type of talent we want to invest in. People who want to set roots down here in Northeast Ohio, have specific talents that will really benefit our economy, that we want to attract them here and keep them here. So when you think about things like nightlife and opportunities for young people, I think that's a very important aspect of this. And I think we are making progress there. By all accounts, the young people that I deal with at Baldwin Wallace and other places are favorably inclined to think of Cleveland now as a place where they can set up roots, perhaps more so than they were 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm optimistic that we're headed in the right direction there.
Do you see other cities doing a better job, and where are some examples we can look to?
Well, the perfect example is our regional rival to the south, Columbus. Columbus, 2 hours down to the south, that city has dramatically transformed itself in the span of a generation, maybe a little bit longer. But any of us who were down in Columbus in the 1980s and 1990s, and you compare it to today, it's really a different place. And that's really benefited them. Now, again, obviously they have the giant university that we don't have, and that helps them. But a lot of young people are both moving to Columbus, setting up roots there, and that's helping that city to attract a lot of investment. And that's something that we need to do a better job at. But I think we're starting to see some progress in that direction.
You mentioned Columbus in terms of Intel. Some of us were wondering, will that have any residual effect further north of Columbus, and what might we expect it to do for our region?
That's hard to say still. It is possible. We would need more than just one big investment. I mean, Intel's not enough. If we see more companies coming into the region, we could start to think of a corridor, in fact, something between Cleveland and Columbus, or Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, of tech growth, of environmental companies growing, all type of high growth industries. We need to be targeting investment in the sectors of the economy that are going to grow in the future: healthcare, technology, et cetera. And I think we do have an opportunity there. again, it's going to come down. I really, truly believe it's going to come down to demographics. Too many companies are still concerned that we just don't have the size of the workforce needed. Let me give you an example. Amazon has been a client of mine for a long time. And of course, Amazon famously had their HQ2 project where they were going to build a second headquarters, and we competed with every other city for that. I asked them when it was over, what was your criteria? And they said it was one thing and one thing only. It was, did you have enough workers to supply us with a workforce that could have, at the time, they envisioned 75,000 people working at the second headquarters. That was a big drawback for Cleveland. So it's going to come down to demographics, unfortunately. We need to do more to attract those more people to this region without question.
So what are those initiating steps that will get this moving in this kind of chicken and egg race? What does it take to initiate change and make it happen?
We need the universities to work together that we can work, that they're playing a bigger role in helping convince businesses and investors to come to the region. We need to do more in terms of our housing stock and in terms of our quality of life to attract young, talented people to the region. Those are the type of people that will help us to ensure longer term economic growth. And we need to invest in the sectors of the economy that are going to grow in the future. Now, fortunately, here in Cleveland, we are very strong in healthcare. And there is no more recession or future-proof industry right now out in the world than the healthcare sector. We're living longer than ever. Well, in the United States, we're kind of stagnating, but most of the world is living longer than ever. And it's going to be a sector that's going to provide continuous growth for the foreseeable future. So that's one advantage, but we need to diversify even more into more sectors, into tech. We see a lot of, for example, the EV operations in Lordstown, things like that. Those are the type of industries and the type of investments that we need.
So when you mentioned that some of those issues like housing come back to public policy or how policy happens, are there examples of policies and programs that more economically competitive cities than Cleveland might be using, or is it just tax breaks and incentives like with Intel where you make it financially attractive? What else can be done policy-wise and program-wise to be attractive?
Yeah, well, certainly there's no way around it. The tax break and incentive model is here to stay, and that's going to continue to be the case. But it has to be more than that. It has to be focused on providing incentives for people to come to the region, and that can be whether it's some type of housing support in terms of subsidized housing, whatever it may be, but bringing more people to the region is imperative. And we need to be focused on any type of incentive that will do that, because the type of investment that we want is only going to come here if the workforce is in place. So I would really focus on any type of housing related incentive, moving type incentive that we can offer.
So back to that worker. So where's that come from? Is it government? Is it the organizations you mentioned, and how Team Neo?
It would have to be public driven. Of course, there would have to be government involvement there. We're competing with everybody else, and other parts, some of the places we're competing with have very favorable demographic advantages vis-a-vis us, especially when we're competing for manufacturing investment with southern states where the population continues to grow at a rapid pace, for example. So yeah, but that would have to be public driven, absolutely.
Well, those economies growing, they have people younger than me because I'm in that part that's skewing Ohio. So what else can we do to attract young people here? You mentioned the amenities. We have theater, library, parks, and a rich history here. How do we make that more attractive to young people to either stay or to come here? Yeah,
well, our university base needs to expand. I mean, we need to invest in higher education. We don't have the single dominant university that Columbus or Detroit have, but we do have a number of high quality institutions of higher education here. We need to be supporting them and attracting more students here. And that's of course becoming a challenge because again, the demographic changes we've seen, some of the social changes we've seen, universities are under pressure as well to attract talent. So, but we should be supporting them, especially when it comes to bringing people from outside of the region to Northeast Ohio, because again, the pool of available students in this region is not growing. It's stagnant at best and could even be declining. And we need to then support the universities, both public and private, to bring more people from outside of the region to Northeast Ohio. And then once they're here, keep them here. That's the next stage, of course. It's all well and good that we bring the students in, but if they go work in some other state or some other region, it's not really benefiting the region. We need to bring young, talented individuals to the region and then keep them here. So it's a long process. This is not something that can happen overnight.
How does immigration fit into all that? And is that something we should be focusing on more?
Absolutely. We do need to, the simple fact is we are going to need more immigrants in the future. The birth rate, like I said, in the United States has fallen to 1.6. So if you know anything about birth rates, a 2.1 birth rate means that your population is steady. So we've fallen to 1.6. This is happening all over the world. Some countries have it much worse than we do. So the only way that we're going to grow our workforce in the future is through immigration. Obviously, that's a very touchy political subject, but when I speak around the world, I tell the audience, you have a choice. You can accept the labor shortages and all the impact that has on the economy or your daily life and restrict immigration, or you can help alleviate those labor shortages by bringing in more immigrants. So that is going to be absolutely imperative for us to attract people to this region from outside of the United States, as well as from other parts of the U.S.
So without giving away too much in your book, because we all want to read it, is the coming decline inevitable? And do you see it being reversed? And more immediately, are things like perhaps an upcoming recession, if that happens, going to accelerate that decline, or how will it impact it?
The one hope to avoid a decline is technology and productivity. Demographically, the situation's not going to change. People are simply having less children all around the world. So the population driver of the economy is not going to be there. Trade and investment is kind of maxed out, if you will. We're not really going to be able to generate too much more growth through trade and investment. It's going to have to come through higher levels of productivity. Now, productivity in the rich world has been declining since the 1970s. And even the information revolution was thought to have a big impact on productivity. It really didn't. It helped productivity bounce back a tiny bit in the late 1990s, early 2000s, but the downward trend continued thereafter. Perhaps artificial intelligence will be that breakthrough that we've been waiting for, but there is a degree of skepticism. We've heard this all before. So we are approaching a world where the level of economic growth is going to be lower than it was in the past. And that's going to make the need to be competitive economically even more important as we're dealing with a slower growth world than we dealt with in the past, really going back generations now.
So as part of that competitive, and this is probably the last question we have time for, as part of that competitiveness and economic growth, how do workforce equity issues play into that? Because there's been a lot more attention in those areas, and what's going to be the impact of that now and going forward?
Well, there has to be a realization that we need all segments of our population to be productive and contributing to our economy. So any segment that's being disadvantaged for whatever reason is a detriment to the economy as a whole. We have again, we're dealing with a declining working age population. And if we have segments within that population who are, for whatever reason, being denied access to the workforce or being limited in their ability to contribute economically, it's to the detriment of the economy. So we're going to need all segments of our country, all segments of Northeast Ohio, working to push our economy forward in this more challenging global environment that we're in.
Well, that's a great note to end on, because CLC is all about collaboration, and it sounds like we need a lot of that in a lot of sectors. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us today, Michael, and turn it over to Mary Ann to walk us out.
Yeah, Michael, thank you. That was just so robust with so many insights. We appreciate your research and your candor and helping to guide us forward.